Let's talk about the gang, the Rolling 60 Crips, right? Let's take the elephant. We're gonna remove the elephant out of the room. Okay, we're gonna talk about the Rolling 60s.
Big U's once mighty empire is crumbling before our eyes. The LA Kingpin has surrendered to face a wave of murder and RICO charges, but not before delivering jaw-dropping revelations about who he believes set him up. From NBA players losing fortunes in rigged dice games to allegations of non-profit funds disappearing into his own pockets, the story behind Big U's downfall is as scandalous as it gets. Eugene Henley Jr., famously known as Big U, recently turned himself in following a federal RICO indictment. But before walking into custody, he posted a fiery Instagram video calling out those he claims played a role in his takedown. He specifically named 600 as being present with the authorities during the raid. He also called out Whack 100 and Loose Cannon, alleging they were complicit in building an online narrative that helped cement the case against him. In his video, Big U didn't just blame these names. He also pointed fingers at the wider internet audience. According to him, every like, share, and repost of the controversy gave the feds more fuel for their case. Even more striking, Big U questioned the credibility of the indictment itself. He claimed that many of the individuals listed in the paperwork weren't even part of his inner circle. He accused federal investigators of stacking charges by linking him to people he barely interacted with, warning that these same people might be pressured into turning against him. And one thing Big U made absolutely clear, he isn't cooperating, and he isn't holding back on naming the people he thinks orchestrated his fall. The story of Big U's unraveling is a tangled web of betrayal, scandal, and accusations, and it's only just beginning. Big U claimed that all the good he did for the community was ignored the moment the indictment came down. He didn't go quietly either, calling out those he believed orchestrated his downfall as he walked into custody on his own terms. And as soon as he was behind bars, the dam broke, and the details came flooding in. The charges? Murder, human trafficking, extortion, and more. Though Big U hasn't gone into specifics, he's been vocal about his innocence. He insists, "I did nothing wrong," and remains confident he'll beat the accusations. But the federal paperwork tells a different story. According to the feds, Big U is the head of a sprawling criminal enterprise tied to the Rolling 60s Crips. They allege he ran the operation like a kingpin, leveraging his name, reputation, and music connections to wield money, power, and fear across Los Angeles. Under the RICO Act, prosecutors have thrown the book at him, stacking multiple charges, including murder, fraud, and extortion, and labeling it all as organized crime. They've even given it a name, Operation Drawdown. In addition to Big U, federal agents have arrested at least 10 other individuals tied to this alleged criminal network. Some were already behind bars, while others, like Brian Macchia, turned themselves in shortly after the charges became public. Sylvester Robinson, also known as They, and Mark Martin, known as Bear Claw, were arrested on March 19, 2025, and now face the same allegations. Court documents depict what authorities call a mafia-like structure. They claim Big U used his street influence and long-standing connections to the Rolling 60s to instill fear and generate revenue throughout LA, reportedly since 2010. While allegedly acting as a powerhouse of his own, Big U's so-called enterprise is accused of collaborating with the Rolling 60s and other criminal groups whenever mutual interests aligned. The picture painted by federal prosecutors is one of a deeply entrenched criminal machine operating in the shadows of Los Angeles for over a decade, now laid bare by the sweeping RICO charges. The Big U enterprise, prosecutors say, is a powerful and independent criminal network involved in a range of illegal activities: murder, extortion, robbery, human trafficking, worker exploitation, fraud, and illegal gambling. And the more the feds dig into the case, the darker it appears. One of the most chilling accusations involves the 2021 killing of a young rapper signed to Big U's own label, Anique Music. Court documents refer to the victim only as RW, a rising artist who had just started making a name for himself. But according to prosecutors, a diss track RW released proved fatal. They claim the song hit too close to home, sparking a deadly confrontation. The allegations state that Big U drove RW out into the Nevada desert and shot him. RW's body was discovered dumped near Interstate 15, A stark reminder, prosecutors say, of the cold, calculated way Big U handled perceived threats. But it wasn't just about personal vendettas. Authorities claim Big U's operations resembled those of a mob boss, employing not only fear and violence, but also meticulous planning. His influence reportedly extended far beyond the streets, touching studios, corporate offices, and even media platforms. His long-standing ties with the Rollin' 60s and other groups gave him a commanding presence few dared to challenge. The Big U enterprise, according to federal statements, used multiple layers of intimidation. Fear wasn't confined to back alleys or street corners. It played out in studios, documentaries, podcasts, and social media. Big U reportedly leveraged his image as an original gangster to generate fame, instill fear, and promote the enterprise's reputation. His media appearances, whether interviews or documentaries, are alleged to have been tools in a broader strategy, showcasing Big U as an untouchable figure whose reach extended everywhere. Prosecutors paint a picture of a man who combined street smarts, media savvy, and a deeply entrenched network to maintain power. The message he allegedly projected was clear. Big U's influence knows no bounds, and those who cross him face serious consequences. Federal investigators say the entire scheme had one clear objective: to create a larger-than-life image, fuel fear, and shield the criminal enterprise from scrutiny. But it wasn't just image building that raised eyebrows. There was also a troubling financial trail. According to the complaint, Big U allegedly diverted donation funds from his nonprofit, Developing Options, straight into his personal accounts. These donations, reportedly made by high-profile celebrities, award-winning companies, and even NBA players, were meant for community initiatives. Instead, the feds claim the money was misappropriated, with city and federal funds involved through ties to Los Angeles' Gang Reduction Youth Development Foundation. It didn't stop there. The complaint also accuses Big U of filing fraudulent pandemic relief paperwork for his music label, Unique Music. While records claim the company turned a $200,000 profit in 2019, prosecutors allege it actually lost $5,000. Despite this discrepancy, Big U still received the relief funds. And the indictment doesn't shy away from his criminal history. Big U served 13 years starting in the 1990s after a failed attempt to rob an undercover officer for cocaine. Prosecutors are now using that past conviction as part of the broader narrative they're presenting. Acting U.S. Attorney Joseph McNally stated that the unsealed complaint outlines a criminal enterprise involved in murder, extortion, human trafficking, and fraud. FBI Representative Ale Davis added that this effort is part of a larger campaign to bring order to Los Angeles neighborhoods. So far, 10 individuals have been arrested, 4 of whom were already behind bars. Another 5 remain at large. If these charges stick, Big U could be looking at life in federal prison. And just when it seemed the case couldn't grow more incriminating, the feds revealed audio recordings. Court documents claim these tapes feature Big U plotting to catch WAC 100 slipping. The recordings allegedly describe a coordinated effort, with Big U and a crew from the Rollin' 60s aggressively pursuing WAC 100. This pursuit, according to investigators, involved a group of 15 to 20 individuals dressed in hoodies. As Big U recounted, "I got my hoodie on all black, tied down." The chilling allegations, combined with the damning audio evidence, paint a picture of an operation that blended intimidation, fraud, and violence, all allegedly masterminded by Big U. "I see you, Eugene Henley. I see you." That's what the recording claims Big U's rival was shouting as tensions exploded. The situation grew more chaotic, with the supposed victim screaming about his wife and kids in the car, pleading for a ceasefire. In the heat of it all, WAC 100 stepped into the fray, not physically, but through the megaphone of Clubhouse. Just after Big U turned himself in, WAC took to the platform to deny everything. He insisted he had no involvement in the case and dismissed Big U's accusations as internet-fueled nonsense. Mocking Big U's apparent surprise at the federal raid, WAC claimed the warning signs had been obvious for a long time. Big U just chose to ignore them. But while WAC was brushing off the drama online, Big U's legal situation was intensifying. A judge quickly ruled to keep him in federal custody, citing the seriousness of the charges and his potential flight risk. There would be no bail, no house arrest, nothing. The next steps in the legal process were already set: a detention hearing on March 31st and an arraignment scheduled for April 8th. No plea had been entered yet, just a formal reading of the charges. Meanwhile, the internet lived up to its reputation for stirring the pot. A sports account, ML Football, saw the controversy as an opportunity to drag Big U's family into the spotlight. They posted a tweet linking Big U's criminal allegations to his son, Dion Henley, a standout linebacker for the Chargers. While they stopped short of making any direct accusations against Dion, the post's insinuations caused a stir. Fans quickly stepped in to shut down the speculative noise. One commenter wrote, "Dion Henley seems like a great dude, also a great player and teammate. Hope he is getting through this." In other words, while the internet tried to tie Dion to his father's scandal, his supporters made it clear they wouldn't stand for baseless accusations. While the internet tried to connect Dion Henley to his father's controversy, fans rallied in his defense. One supporter pointed out, "What does Dion have to do with any of this? He's a great dude." Another called him tough as nails, adding that they'd take 10 of him on their team if they could. In the eyes of many, Dion was being unfairly dragged into a story that had nothing to do with him. Nobody's denying the gravity of the charges against Big U, but bringing his son into the equation felt like a shameless grab for clicks. Dion remains focused on his football career, earning respect in the league and from his teammates. Meanwhile, Big U faces the possibility of life in prison. To understand how he ended up in this position, it's necessary to examine his long, checkered history, one that stretches back far before his public persona as a community figure. Eugene Big U Henley's criminal trail started making headlines long before the world knew him for his music ties or his activism. In 1991, he was arrested in a cocaine sting. This wasn't a small-time bust. He was caught trying to rob an undercover sheriff's deputy in a setup that earned him 13 years in state prison. Instead of fading into obscurity, that sentence only amplified his reputation. Authorities believed that even back then, he wasn't just a member of the Rollin' 60s Crips. He was one of their leaders. His prison stint didn't diminish his influence, it boosted his status on the streets. When he was released in the early 2000s, Big U returned as more than just a known name. He was a figure of respect and authority. However, freedom didn't mean he was free from scrutiny. The LAPD and FBI never stopped watching him. Over the years, Big U was linked to more than 20 major investigations. These ranged from drug trafficking and illegal firearms to secret gang meetings where violence was allegedly discussed and approved. Law enforcement described him as a fixer, the person called upon when street conflicts needed to be settled, someone who moved quietly but wielded significant power behind the scenes. If conflicts escalated, Big U was known to bring them back under control. His influence ran so deep that it extended far beyond the street corners. Yet publicly, he presented an entirely different image. He visited schools, gave interviews on stopping gang violence, and founded a nonprofit called Developing Options, ostensibly to keep kids off the streets. But according to federal authorities, the nonprofit was a front. The indictment alleges that Big U used Developing Options to solicit donations from NBA players, businesses, and even city programs, claiming the funds would support community outreach initiatives. Instead, prosecutors say the money flowed directly into his personal bank account. No middleman, no additional paperwork, just straight into his pocket. Developing Options wasn't just a local charity. It received city backing through the Mayor's Gang Reduction Youth Development Foundation, which also used federal funding. As a result, prosecutors alleged that the scheme wasn't confined to the neighborhood level. It crossed city and federal lines. IRS Special Agent Tyler Hatcher described the RICO charges against Big U and his associates as evidence of a broad pattern of crimes, from extortion to tax evasion, all orchestrated under a tightly run criminal organization. Hatcher claimed that Henley not only defrauded donors and businesses, but also misled the county of Los Angeles. While the nonprofit publicly promoted anti-gang solutions, authorities allege it was simultaneously fueling activities that ran completely counter to its stated mission. This case wasn't built overnight. LAPD Chief Jim McDonnell said the department had worked side by side with the FBI's Operation South Bureau Task Force on the Rollin' 60s gang for years. McDonnell praised the task force's efforts as critical in bringing the charges, emphasizing that the collaboration was a major step forward in combating gang violence and bringing relief to a long-suffering community. As the federal charges and IRS accusations piled up, state records from the California Franchise Tax Board added another damning layer. They showed that developing options had been officially suspended as of April 2024, further casting doubt on the nonprofit's legitimacy and bolstering the authorities' case that this was far more than a legitimate community outreach program. Though the California Franchise Tax Board didn't provide a specific reason for the suspension of developing options, the designation alone meant the nonprofit had effectively been shut down. Once suspended, a nonprofit loses its legal standing to operate, fundraise, or accept donations and becomes subject to hefty fines. While FTB representatives refused to comment on this particular case, they confirmed that such a suspension essentially cripples the organization from within. Yet despite the suspension, city records show that the checks didn't immediately stop. In fact, Los Angeles city documents revealed that Henley's organizations were still under contract to receive nearly $800,000 as late as July 2024. That payment was the final installment of a 4-year agreement totaling over $2.2 million, funded by the city's Gang Reduction and Youth Development GRID program. GRID is designed to support community groups that prevent violence before it erupts. For years, Henley's nonprofits had been on the approved funding list, receiving substantial city backing. The relationship dated back over a decade. From 2011 onward, Henley's organizations received hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. During the period from 2018 to 2021, city funds allocated to his group averaged $500,000 per year. But after crime spiked in the aftermath of the pandemic, the funding increased. In 2023, then-Mayor Eric Garcetti called for more intervention spending, which meant even more money flowed into programs like Henley's. Tax filings from that year indicated that one of Henley's nonprofits, the Ex-Offender Fellowship, reported nearly $2 million in revenue. What wasn't clear, however, was the source of those private donations. The filings didn't list the names of the donors, leaving many to wonder who was backing the organization so heavily. What was clear, according to federal investigators, was that Henley himself wasn't financially struggling. IRS records showed that as president and director, Henley took home a $95,000 salary. But the larger pool of cash, the bulk of the nonprofit's funds, was paid out to unnamed corporate officers, directors, and trustees. This lack of transparency, prosecutors claimed, wasn't coincidental. Instead, they alleged that Henley deliberately moved donation money into his personal bank accounts, pocketing tens of thousands of dollars intended for community programs. One donation in particular raised eyebrows: $20,000 from an NBA All-Star, earmarked for children's programs. According to the federal complaint, that money never made it to the kids. Instead, it went directly into Henley's personal accounts. But the accusations didn't stop there. The complaint also alleged that Henley falsified tax returns, failed to report hidden income, and even lied on a bank loan application to qualify for a home loan. What started as a case of suspected misuse of funds had grown into a web of alleged fraud, spanning from false documentation and hidden earnings to outright deception on financial forms. To federal prosecutors, this wasn't just a matter of mismanagement, it was a calculated pattern of fraud, meticulously executed on paper, online, and throughout the financial system. So what's the city's response to all of this? Not much. When NBC Los Angeles reached out, the mayor's office dodged direct questions about developing options. Instead, they sent a brief statement claiming the city had strict oversight measures in place, but also admitted that the complaint alleges a sophisticated scheme designed to sidestep that oversight. A city spokesperson emphasized their zero tolerance for malfeasance and noted that GRID program oversight had been tightened in recent years. However, when pressed for hard evidence, such as compliance checks or audit records, the city didn't produce any documentation. They also stressed that this alleged criminal activity was not reflective of the entire GRID program. With more than 20 organizations and hundreds of people working under the GRID umbrella, city officials pointed out that the program as a whole had contributed to reduced gang violence in LA for 2 consecutive years. But as federal charges mounted against Big U, the story took an even wilder turn. Rumors began swirling about a rigged dice game that ended in million-dollar losses. According to court filings, the saga started back in June 2019 at a high-stakes game in Los Angeles. This wasn't just some casual gathering. Among the players were a professional boxer, referred to only as AB, and several NBA stars. The money was real, but the game wasn't. Authorities say AB and his crew used loaded dice to cheat the other players, costing the NBA participants millions. When word got out, Big U allegedly got involved. Prosecutors claim he instructed his associates to rough up AB, not only as punishment for the scam, but because AB failed to check in with Henley before hosting the game. Furthermore, according to a cooperating witness, Big U wanted to recover the money on behalf of the scammed NBA players. Federal documents state that Henley directed his crew to confront AB and retrieve the lost funds, reinforcing the image of Henley as an enforcer with influence that stretched far beyond his public-facing nonprofit work. Court records reveal that members of the Rollin' 60s crew showed up to apply direct pressure on AB, making it clear that Henley's network didn't just talk, it acted. And according to a cooperating witness, this wasn't an isolated incident. Celebrities and athletes in LA were reportedly expected to check in with Big U before attending local events. Whether it was a game, a party, or a commercial shoot, failing to get Henley's green light supposedly invited serious retaliation from his enterprise. The complaint details a particularly high-stakes confrontation. In one recorded meeting, Henley allegedly told Victim 1 about a confrontation with AB after AB reportedly scammed a current NBA All-Star out of $1.5 million and a former NBA All-Star out of $5 million. Henley then discussed charging the defrauded players $100,000, not for legal representation, but simply to help them recover their lost money. And while these alleged schemes played out behind closed doors, Henley continued presenting himself as a public benefactor. That's where donations from NBA stars Draymond Green and Shaquille O'Neal come into the picture. Both believed their contributions would support developing options and its programs for kids. Green donated $20,000 in August 2019. Shaq contributed another $20,000, thinking it would benefit youth sports teams like the Crenshaw Rams. But prosecutors say the reality was much different. Instead of funding those programs, the money went straight into Henley's personal accounts. Between 2018 and 2023, the nonprofit received $2.35 million in city funds through the GRID program. The indictment claims that Henley didn't use the money to help the community as promised. Instead, it served as yet another source of personal enrichment. Henley's nonprofit Developing Options reportedly received $550,000 annually from the city, but prosecutors allege he personally pulled hundreds of thousands out of that total. While his public mission seemed admirable, a 2020 interview with Vibe paints a stark contrast to the charges against him. In that interview, Henley described his goal as creating a supportive environment for young African American kids, something he felt had been missing in his community. He said, "The ultimate goal is to be for young African American kids what the YMCA and these other places could have and should have been." Despite his stated intentions, the allegations suggest that the nonprofit served as a front for funneling public and private funds into Henley's pockets. According to investigators, his influence wasn't just built on fraud, though. It had deep roots in the streets of South Central Los Angeles, where he first made a name for himself decades ago. Henley's rise started in the Crenshaw district of the 1980s, a neighborhood where survival often meant becoming part of the gang culture early on. By his early teens, Henley had joined the Rollin' 60s Crips. For him, gang life wasn't a temporary phase, it was a way of life, a matter of survival. And even at a young age, Henley stood out. Not because he was the loudest, but because he was one of the smartest. He understood how to move strategically, how to organize, and when to exert pressure. By the late 1980s, Henley's reputation had grown to the point that law enforcement had taken notice. His name didn't just circulate on the streets, it showed up in police reports. Officers knew Henley was no ordinary gang member, he was a leader. That reputation only solidified after he served 13 years in prison. When he came home, Henley rebranded himself as a community figure, publicly flipping the image he had built in his early years. But as prosecutors now claim, the criminal activities behind the scenes never truly stopped. Henley's creation of developing options initially seemed like a legitimate fresh start. The nonprofit was involved with schools, youth centers, and even probation departments, giving Henley access to young people at pivotal moments in their lives. In those settings, he wasn't the enforcer from his past. He was a mentor, someone who spoke directly to kids from the same streets he grew up on. To many in South LA, Henley was a father figure offering guidance that wasn't often found at home. He didn't preach at them, he spoke their language and understood their struggles. But there was another side, one that never appeared in community flyers or press releases. In LA's hip-hop scene, Henley had an undeniable, if unspoken, influence. Aspiring rappers, particularly those coming from the streets, understood that making it big often required more than just talent. You had to move carefully, ensuring your shows, video shoots, and even local deliveries didn't spark the wrong kind of attention. That's where Henley's power came into play. He wasn't a performer, but he controlled access. Henley had connections in areas that weren't safe for most to navigate, and he used that influence to determine who could operate without trouble and who might be shut out. One of the most notable artists Henley worked with was Nipsey Hussle. Early in Nipsey's career, he faced the dual challenges of building his music career while navigating the complexities of his neighborhood's politics. Henley played a key role in helping Nipsey walk that fine line. Under Henley's guidance, Nipsey could focus on his craft without constantly looking over his shoulder. The mutual respect between them was evident, even if it wasn't spoken aloud. Yet, the contradiction remained. On one hand, Henley was the mentor who reached out to kids just released from juvenile hall or probation. On the other hand, he retained a reputation as someone who could shut down events or pressure entire crews if he saw fit. It was a dual image, one of redemption and reform in public, and one of lingering authority and control behind the scenes. Big U once represented peace and transformation, working alongside the Amer I Can Foundation, founded by NFL legend Jim Brown. Through the Charge program, he helped gang members find ways out of the cycle of violence and encouraged them to take control of their lives. Henley spoke about change and mentored the youth. But despite his efforts, street politics didn't disappear, and one particular confrontation underscored that reality. A well-documented parking lot dispute outside the Marathon clothing store highlighted the tensions between Big U, Nipsey Hussle, and Nipsey's brother, Black Sam. The argument reportedly centered on property and control. Some say Big U sought to take over land tied to Nipsey's brand, but Sam refused to give in. The confrontation nearly turned physical, exposing the complicated dynamics between them. Big U had a history with Nipsey, helping him early in his career. But as Nipsey rose to prominence, the distance between them grew. Nipsey wanted to manage his block on his own terms, keeping it a family-run operation. After Nipsey's death, Big U stayed largely silent. Yet even in that silence, his reputation loomed large. In Los Angeles, Big U was seen as a powerful figure whose reach extended far beyond music. Wiz Khalifa once called him rap's godfather, not for his lyrical skills, but for his influence. Big U shaped who got protected, who got silenced, and who got noticed in the LA hip-hop scene. Artists often felt compelled to check in with him or risk facing complications. Now, the man who once had the support of city leaders and a reputation that carried weight is sitting behind bars. His story, marked by dual identities as both a mentor and a power player, remains one of the most complex in LA's hip-hop and street history.